I have omitted all references to where I live because no one's even supposed to know about this. The government has been quite clear about what happens if we share our story. I hope there's no way they can trace my identity through this. I've been living in my basement for the past 5 weeks. My dad lives with me too. I went I guess, to a local community college, staying at home to save rent. My mom disappeared at about the same time we both were trapped inside of her house. I guess I should make a correction. I don't technically live in my basement. My dad and I go upstairs every once in a while to restock on food from our big walk-in pantry. For the most part though, we have everything we need down here. A twin-size bed for me, a sleeping bag for my dad. He insisted that I take the bed. A fully stocked fridge and freezer, piles of canned goods, a lifetime supply of batteries, a generator, basically everything you would need for the apocalypse, which has more or less happened. See, when I came home one night from class, I don't remember when it was exactly, I heard this weird noise outside. Where we live, coyotes aren't too uncommon, so I figured that must be it. After all, it did sound like one. The noise was part whine, part growl. I almost forgot about it, to be honest. And those kinds of things didn't faze me anymore. Also, I was playing video games and I didn't want to be interrupted. It only caught my attention when it started to growl. I refer to the thing as it because I still have no idea what it was. I don't think anyone does. At this point, I went over to my window to look. There was nothing in sight. I figured it was on a different side of the house, so I went through a couple different rooms and I looked out of the windows. Nothing. It was getting dark, so I knew I might have missed it. I could still hear the noise intermittently. When I was going through the rooms the second time, my mom stopped me. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Lose something?" "No. Do you hear that growling? It's really getting on my nerves. I can't focus." She rolled her eyes. I tried to explain in the past how most video games actually required focus. Like most moms, she didn't understand how that could be possible. She probably thought that it was like watching a TV show or something. My mom and I stood still. After a few seconds, the growls resumed. "Yeah, I do hear that," she said. "Probably just a coyote." "Mom, coyotes don't sound like that," I said. It gurgled in response, a noise I hadn't heard before and never hoped to hear again. Imagine someone gurgling mouthwash, except they're also choking at the same time. That's as close as I can describe the sound. She frowned, more annoyed than worried. "We should call the police, I guess." At the time, it seemed like a good idea. And to be honest, I don't think there was much else to do. At some point, one of us would have had to go outside. My dad worked from home, but my mom went shopping most days, and I of course had classes. It doesn't matter now. She called and they showed up pretty fast. Most of the time, it took half an hour or longer for them to respond to non-emergencies. Part of that was probably because our town is small, and the police department is predictably understaffed. Well, I guess they weren't for the most part, but there were times that we could have used more people, like that night. They arrived 10 minutes after the call. One of them knocked on the door and my mom went to answer. I had gone back up to my room, so I only heard pieces of conversation. My focus had returned to video games. The door closed and I guessed that my mom had gone outside for some reason. I dropped my controller when I heard screaming outside. I had been playing COD and my character got lit up on screen. My focus, however, had shifted entirely to the noises outside. What sounded like a roar echoed down the street, followed by more screams and a gunshot. I had never understood how people could freeze up in emergencies. There had been a man the past year that had watched, slack-jawed, as someone else had gotten mauled by a bear. No one blamed him for his inaction, of course, and I didn't either. You can't exactly fight a bear without a gun. I just couldn't imagine being in that kind of shock. I understand now. As I listened to the last couple screams, I finally found the ability to move. Part of me was denying what I've heard, that there was no way my mom could have been dead. I was thinking worst case scenario when I knew it. First of all, I didn't even know what had happened. It was possible that no one was hurt, that whatever animal had been outside had been killed. I knew that was wishful thinking though. Something had gone wrong. I'm still not sure what happened. All I know is that I went downstairs to look out our living room window. There was a trail of blood in the driveway, and a couple of scraps of what had probably been an officer's uniform. That was it. No bodies, no stray gun, no other signs of violence. It should have been impossible. At that point, my dad said something behind me. I was still pretty shocked, so I didn't hear what he said. When he shook me by my shoulder, I was able to listen. "What happened?" he asked. His face was pale and he was panting like he had just run a marathon. To my horror, I had been doing the same thing. I probably scared him more than the screaming had. I have no idea," I stammered. I pointed out of the window at the trail of blood. My dad took one look and ran into the kitchen. "I'm calling the police," he said. "Mom just did that," I pointed out. And then I remembered that my dad had been working in the office, probably with his headphones on. He used to own a local shop before all this shit happened, and he worked from home more times than not. I realized that he wouldn't have heard any conversation, though we clearly had heard the screams. He almost dropped the phone. "Your mother was out there," he said calmly. "Yeah." I didn't elaborate. There was no need. I sat down heavily on one of the couches. My dad went ahead and placed the call. They said that they would send another unit out immediately, but we never heard back. We didn't hear anything that evening, no matter how many times we called or frantically searched Google. My dad gave up after calling to check in for the third time. We spent the rest of the evening in silence. Neither of us remembered to eat. I never had much of an appetite anyways. We didn't speak much about what had happened. I brought up the fact that Mom could be hurt or dead, though I didn't say explicitly, and he silenced me. He knew that it wasn't good to talk about it, not until we knew more details. I didn't get much sleep that night. Video games could not distract me from the thing that had taken my mom. I gave up after a few minutes. Not even Reddit could distract me, and so I just laid on my bed and stared at the ceiling until, mercifully, I fell asleep. My dad woke me up the next morning. "You have to come see this," he said. The grim look on his face, combined with the prior day's events, were rough enough to jolt me awake. The local news was on. A blurred photo of something was shown on screen with a giant question mark above it. I couldn't make out details except for fur and what looked like 4 limbs. The photo had clearly been taken while the person was running. The background was blurred too. "Last night, there was an attack at Redacted," the reporter was saying. "People claimed they had heard a strange growling noise before an unnamed woman called the police. And that's where the story ends. No one heard back from the police or the neighbors. A second squadron was sent to investigate, but they found no clues of what had happened. We are still waiting for further information." "Damn it, I called them," Dad said. "They just didn't pick up." I was willing to chalk up their incompetence to the police department. As I said earlier, we live in a small town. To be fair, I had no idea that they were lying. The day crawled along. I tried getting some work done that I had a couple days off from school, but I couldn't focus. Every other minute took me back to the bloody driveway and the mystery of what had happened. I wanted to think my mom was okay. My dad felt the same, although he locked himself in his office for 10 hours. My first thought was that he wanted to avoid talking to me because he didn't know what to say. Much later, I would realize that he was giving me much needed space. I had to digest the uncertainty and fear in my own before I would even come close to talking with him. Much of that day was spent staring at the wall. I'm usually productive, but I guess no one would be in my circumstances. It didn't matter anyways. School dropped off my radar pretty fast. More news trickled in that evening. My dad and I were eating a mostly silent dinner of soup. We had spoken a little, but there was not much to be said. We were both in a sort of denial, convinced that my mom would come back at some point, or at least that we would find her. It may have been for the best that it was left unknown, knowing what the monster has done since. The same news guy was on, though he looked more frazzled than he had earlier. His hair was a mess and there were pronounced rings under his eyes. "We've had reports of 10 different police officers going missing," he said. There was more, but that first sentence was all that I had remembered. I hadn't even known that there were 10 people in the entire police department, and that many had gone missing. We were in deep shit. And worse, there were video clips obviously taken from people's smartphones of people in black suits surrounding the area. The governor made a statement later saying that there was a federal intervention going on in our town, and that everyone was advised to keep their distance. Pretty cheesy, I know, except it wasn't funny then. Still isn't, really. No one knew what was going on. The feds could have been in the Men in Black or something. I can't rule anything out. It didn't take them long to lock the place down. No one was to enter or leave the neighborhood. Other residents were advised to temporarily leave town because there was a shit ton of government traffic in the area. 2 nights after the feds arrived, my dad questioned their motives. "You think they're really the government?" he asked over breakfast. "I think it's a load of shit. They just don't want to admit their mistakes. It's a cover-up, probably." My dad didn't usually buy into conspiracy theories. That gives you an idea of how serious this whole thing had become. And worse, I even believed him. Surely the government order, which was later enforced by martial law, couldn't be real. What would they do if someone tried to leave? Arrest them? I wish that had been the case. We learned the next morning that a family had tried to escape. The feds, if that's who they really were, tried to stop them, but they went on ahead. And then they disappeared. No one saw them again. Other family members were baffled. Friends couldn't get in touch with them. Even their car had mysteriously vanished, despite being sighted just 5 minutes from a gas station. I knew what had happened, though. The monster had found them, just as it had found my mom, and as it would find many others. Right now, it's been 5.5 weeks since the monster arrived. I started this entry a couple days ago, but I didn't have the guts to post it. I still haven't, I guess, because of the possible repercussions. The government wants to keep a lid on this thing as much as possible. No one cares about small towns, even if a dozen people go missing. The general public will buy into anything the news outlets say. And at this point, I think those outlets are told what to say. The news stopped covering the incident almost as soon as the feds had arrived, and no one's questioned it since. And it's not just the media. Anyone who shares online about it has their post deleted. Most of the time, people tweet out updates or try posting videos of the monster, and it gets taken down within seconds. I tried myself since I got a picture of the thing the other day. My image was no clearer than anyone's. It showed a big, furry, 4-legged thing, and it was deleted almost instantly. When I tried again, I found myself locked out of my account. I have no idea how deep this cover-up runs, and my dad was right. I'm sure of it. Whatever's happening here, the government doesn't want people to know about it. We're still in contact with family and friends, at least the ones who are out of state. They have no more luck than we do. They of course believe our story, seeing as they can't get flights to any airport nearby, and that we can't physically leave. Anyone else views our story with skepticism, treating it as another internet conspiracy. And to be fair, I would too. Probably no one's heard of our town or any towns nearby, and our family has no evidence to support what's happening. Everyone in our town, at least the ones we've tried to contact, have left or gone missing. My dad even checked our street one day, bringing his shotgun down with him after we had gone a couple days without hearing the monster. Everything was abandoned. There weren't even feds anymore, or policemen, or anyone of authority. We would have driven out then, had there not been a problem with our car. My dad's still trying to fix the engine. As I write this, I'm not sure what will happen next. My dad insists that we leave soon, but I'm hesitant. After all, that family that tried leaving a month ago vanished, and they had driven as far as 30 miles from our house. Nowhere nearby was safe. A car wasn't adequate protection. Still, we can't stay here forever. We only have so much food, though the neighbors also have left some, and more importantly, I don't think we can stay sane spending a year in isolation. The growling today was worse than usual. It's not uncommon for the monster to stop by. For some reason, it does so semi-daily, yet it never gets close to our house. The monster is only visible from a distance, and even then its presence is uncertain. Without the growling, we would have probably tried leaving by now. So, I guess the noise is a good thing. It usually stays for a few minutes and then leaves for the day. Once, it was gone for a week. My dad managed to fix our car today. He said it was something with the piston. I have no idea how he fixed it or what the hell the piston does. He spent the last couple of weeks researching it online and teaching himself. It's not like we have much else to do. After we got over the shock of everything, I pretty much isolated myself, playing video games and browsing Reddit. My dad and I aren't that close. We did used to do things outside, biking, hiking, fishing, and that's not an option anymore. And so without that, there's not much to do except to sit around. We were both in a good mood tonight with the car being fixed, so I decided to broach the subject. "Do you think we can leave now?" I asked. "I don't know." My dad hesitated. "I guess we should try." He didn't need to say more. Spending a month in isolation leads to a lot of unspoken communication. I knew what he was thinking. We were perfectly safe for now. The creature had never entered anyone's home. It always preyed on those who went outside. And we still had enough food for half a year. Our generator had died, but we have solar panels outside that at least leave us with some electricity. All things considered, we were in a decent place. It's probably a good idea to wait. We still hear the monster most days, and another month of this should be bearable enough. The first weeks were the hardest anyways. I think I'm getting used to being alone. I feel like I should try posting this, but I don't want to get my other accounts deleted. I tried again yesterday to post some images to my Instagram account. Not only did they get deleted, but so did my profile. And when I tried to make another, it gave me a strange error that I had never seen before. Some kind of error code with a bunch of letters and numbers. I suspect it's not a coincidence. My other accounts work for some reason, and there doesn't seem to be much logic to the things that do work. For instance, we can talk with our cousins in Wisconsin as much as we want about the monster. As I've said, they believe us completely, even if no one else does. The problem is, there's no way to change that without getting some photos out. It's not like anyone will come visit our town, and if they did, they would disappear before they could get the word out. For the moment, we'll stay put, but I don't know how long that will last. The temptation of leaving, even with the monster as a threat, is too great. It would have been better if the car had been functional this whole time, so we could have exercised some self-control. I suppose it won't make much difference in the end. It's time to upload this dang story. I don't care anymore. I'm posting it everywhere. My remaining Reddit accounts, 4chan, fanfic websites, anywhere that lets me post stories. It no longer matters if my post makes it out or not. By the end of the day, I'll either be dead or far away from this town. Maybe I'll be able to share its name when I do get out. It'll be nice to talk to other people. The conversations I've had over the phone don't really count. It's hard to convey just how taxing this isolation has been, now that we know we're leaving. The reason we're leaving is simple. The monster is gone. At least we think it is. An old friend of mine who happens to live in my state sent me some frantic text earlier, saying that he knows we haven't talked in forever, but I just had to see something. No one else was responding to him, it seems. I should feel flattered that he remembered me at all. I had to think for a while before I even recognized his face. He sent pictures, like me. He lives in a pretty small town, though it's a little bigger, about 10,000 people versus a couple thousand in mine. There's not just one monster anymore. There are dozens of things. For some reason, all the photos turned out blurry, just like the ones I tried taking. I can't say I'm surprised. I still sometimes find myself doubting what's happened, convinced that I must be going insane. If it weren't for my dad, who has been as stoic as ever, I would have ventured out already and yelled for the thing to come get me. The monster near us hasn't appeared in some time. It's been at least 3 days, maybe 4. I haven't exactly kept track. I think we realized this morning that something was up. Not hearing it had been more noticeable at this point. My dad thinks that it might have moved on, that now is our best chance of escaping. I'm not sure I agree, given how many my old friends saw, but I can't deny one fact. We'll either leave or die of starvation. It's not a tough decision, even if we might be heading towards our own deaths. I'm ready. I'm sick of waiting. I didn't realize it until our car got fixed, but I've been wasting my life in this house. Sure, we might be going to die outside, but what's the difference if we have to leave anyways? My dad won't wait for us to starve, and I won't either. He risked going over to my neighbor's house this morning. To my surprise, he made it back unscathed. We now have 3 guns and a shit ton of ammunition. The neighbors even had an old Lee Enfield sniper from World War II. It seems to work. My dad tested it out. I told him it was too risky, that the monster could be drawn to us by the noise, until he pointed out that we'll be driving for hours anyway. Plenty of time for that thing to catch us, if it's going to. And we know that, if it wants to, it will. God knows how many it's taken. Wish me luck. I really hope someone reads this. And if I don't make it, but this still gets out there, keep an eye on the news. The second you hear about a strange animal, or see blurry photos of a black and gray behemoth, get the hell out of wherever you live, maybe out of the country. It's possible the monster is averse to heat or cold. Probably cold. If we do make it out, we're headed to Canada. I'll post if we make it out safely, and if this post even survives. Hi everyone. A lot has happened since my first post. My phone was dead too, so I couldn't share anything if I wanted to. But to be honest, I kind of forgot about it, with all that's been going on. Anyways, back to when we tried to escape. We left the house without issue. There are 2 roads that go out of my town. One winds south and the other north. And since we were headed to Canada, we took the north road through long stretches of isolated forest. I was pretty nervous, to say the least. No one I knew had gotten out of town alive. And worse, there was that friend that had texted me, showing that our monster was just one of many, and that they were beginning to spread. My dad had made his mind up though, and he convinced me of the same. We couldn't have stayed. It would have been like waiting for a death sentence. Better to die trying to escape, which, if you haven't figured it out by now, it worked. We had our first run-in with the monster partway down the northbound road. The thing was fast. We were driving along without issue, and then the car suddenly exploded in front of us as if we had hit something, which we did. I was too dazed at first to notice, and so was my dad, but we noticed the bashed-in hood of the car after a few seconds. There was fur sticking out of one of our headlights, which had broken. Other than that, nothing suggested the monster. Somehow, we did not jump to that conclusion at first. My dad figured he had just missed a deer in the road. It happens all the time. And the fur actually looked like deer fur somehow. It was a dark tan about the length of a phone. Our car still worked, so we kept driving. That was a mistake. About a minute after the accident, I heard the sound of tires being slashed. And don't ask me how that happened while we were moving, I don't know. My dad claims that he didn't even notice until the car began skidding to a stop. When we did stop, my dad cursed. He had first thought that the initial accident had screwed something up, until I told him what I had heard. And that's when he balked. We both knew that the monster had probably been responsible. Sure enough, it emerged from the nearby trees, and it was fast, like supernaturally fast. I swear that in less than a second, it covered 100 feet between us and the woods. And then it was at the car, scrabbling with its claws at my window in the back. It was the first time that I had gotten a good look at the thing. It had hunched back, kind of like a werewolf, and claws the size of a hand. The fur was indeed the same shade as that of a deer, and the worst was its black, beady eyes, like the eyes of a predator you see in movies. Somehow, it couldn't break through the window. The monster even tried gnawing its way in through with its rows of shark-like teeth. I could only watch in horror as it slobbered on the car. My dad snapped me out of it. "Get the gun!" he yelled at me. I, for some reason, asked him which one. "Any," he said, and so I grabbed the first one I could from the trunk. Thankfully, it was a hatchback. I came up with a shotgun, which was a relief. The sniper would not have been ideal in that situation. My dad had shown me how to fire the guns before he left, with the exception of the sniper. He had said that there was no way I could learn enough in a few minutes. And besides, if we were in a position to use it, he would have time to grab it himself and line up a shot. I had never gone hunting with him, never really had an interest in guns until now, but I paid attention to every detail that he showed me. I had known that our lives might depend on it, like they did then. I brought the already loaded shotgun up and I flicked off the safety, putting the stock up against my shoulder. For a moment, I was too afraid to shoot. The monster was moving to the passenger window, as if that would provide a better entrance. My dad yelled at me to shoot again, and I finally did, wincing as the gun boomed in such an enclosed space. In hindsight, while we didn't have a choice, it was not the smartest thing to do. There could have been shrapnel, especially because my shot caught the upper part of the window, where it bordered the metal of the car. But we got lucky. The monster howled and I could see it pouring red blood onto the ground. It ran back into the woods as fast as it had come. I sat there with a gun, waiting for the longest few minutes after my life. My dad finally told me to lower the gun. There were no more monsters coming. I relented, turning the safety back on and putting the gun on the back seat. "Well, shit," my dad said. "What?" "The car." It took me a moment, but I realized what he was saying. The car was now borderline totaled. In addition to the busted front end, the tires were now slashed. We only had one spare in the back. We were ballsy enough to get out and check the damage. Both of the rear tires were busted, and I mean it. The rubber was shredded, and the metal was gouged at least half an inch deep. I was amazed that the monster hadn't broken into our car. "We'll have to walk," my dad said grimly. I didn't like that idea at all. Yeah, we had heard one of the monsters and nothing was after us at the moment. But I had seen how fast the thing was. If it did decide to come out after us in the open, we would be dead. I doubted I could even pull a trigger faster than the monster ran at us. My dad convinced me to go. If we stayed in the car, he said, it would be the same as hiding in our house. We'd be waiting for the inevitable. Worse, we had brought only a few supplies. Snacks, some PB&Js, water, the guns, and a first aid kit. To be fair, that was all we should have needed. The drive up to Canada was not long, only a few hours at most. We couldn't bring supplies with us either. Neither of us had thought to bring backpacks. Again, the trip wasn't supposed to take long. We figured that any delays would end with us dead. No point in overstocking the car. I suppose that was pretty stupid in hindsight. We each took a gun. I kept a shotgun since I knew I could use it. My dad took a 9mm pistol he had nabbed in what he had most likely been an illegal auction. I didn't care now though. At that time, my mom had criticized him for it. There was plenty of ammo, so we stuffed our pants in coat pockets. We did not bring any food or water. My dad knew there was a convenience store 4 miles away, and more supplies would have bogged us down. The guns and ammo were already enough to carry. It took the better part of 2 hours to walk there. For most of that walk, I expected to die. My hand shook so hard that I dropped the shotgun twice. Thank God I had remembered to turn on the safety before. I would have blown one of us apart otherwise. I even fingered the trigger when I saw movement at one point. It had been a squirrel and I didn't care about shooting the thing, but I did worry about it attracting the monster with noise. I knew that my dad had been right, that there was no point hiding inside the car, but I wanted to run back there after a few minutes. Starving had more appeal than being torn apart by a monster. We made it without issue. By the time we walked into that store, I was dead tired. My anxiety had worn off and I had already been running on fumes. The first thing I did was set my shotgun down and curl up in a waiting chair in the back. We stayed there for 3 days. Neither of us were eager to leave. There were a lot of non-perishables in the store. The doors could be double-bolted, and there was even a microwave in the back. Plus, there was a cellar with an entrance from the inside, which went down about 30 feet into the ground. We were as safe there as we had been in our own home. Mostly, I think we were waiting. There were no more sightings of a monster, but with the half-dozen windows and glass door in the place, we expected a monster to at least come sniffing. Nothing bothered us. There were no people either, which bothered me. Since that road was one of 2 going out of our town, it usually had a lot of traffic. We did not spot a single car in our time at the store. There weren't even any in the small parking lot, unless you count the rusted Volkswagen Beetle frame sitting on the grass. That thing had been there since my dad was a kid. No one bothered to tow it, and it kind of became a novelty over time. We took our time figuring out what to do. My dad and I knew that whatever we decided next would determine whether we made it out alive. We were in no rush either. Being in a store stocked with food, water, and heat. There was even a cellar that we could have retreated to, had the monster tried to break in. And we even found some sleeping bags down there. Our first idea came from me, and it was pretty much shot down immediately. I thought we could call someone for help. Not the police, since they all went missing before, but a friend or someone else nearby. My dad pointed out that no one would want to come pick us up, with the monsters roaming around, and they probably couldn't. We suspected that the government was keeping everyone out. They hadn't kept us from leaving, true, but they probably couldn't. Staying in that town would have been a death sentence. And not to mention that our phones were dead. Neither of us had thought to bring chargers. If we would have only spent a few hours on the road as planned, we wouldn't have needed them, and we would have just bought some in Canada. But that decision was starting to look really bad, along with the many other things that we had neglected. My dad thought for a while that we could just wait for a car to drive down the road, and that we could signal it with our guns. Not a terrible idea really, and a lot better than mine. Just one problem. There were still no cars, even after 2 days of waiting. No signs of life either, which was good because we didn't see the monster, but it was also strange. There were usually animals roaming the woods. We settled on a new plan when it became clear cars weren't coming. I suppose we could have been more patient. It didn't make sense to wait though, not with the one monster around and the possibility of more trying to break in. Our situation had become no different than before. When we decided to leave home, we would either leave or stay put and die. My dad knew that the police department was 10 miles or so down the road. He had been very hesitant to consider walking, and for good reason. 10 miles would take hours to cover, plenty of time for a monster to ambush us, which would likely end in our death. I also suspected that, during our walk to the store, we had not gotten lucky at all. The monster I had shot was probably the only one in the area. It would not have to come after us so soon after being attacked. But 3 days had passed and it might have shaken off its hesitation at this point. It wasn't much of a choice really. We had nowhere else to go and the store was like a ticking time bomb. My dad suggested at one point that maybe I had killed the monster, and that was why it hadn't bothered us. I doubted that seriously. I also knew that there were more monsters, a lot more in the nearby town, the one my friend had texted me from. If they decided to come near us, we were probably screwed. And so, early that afternoon, we decided to leave. There were no backpacks in the store either, and we didn't want to lug grocery bags around with our guns to carry. It wouldn't be too long, we figured, and our problems would be resolved in one way or another at the police department. If someone was alive there, or there was some means of escape, we would take it. And if not, well, the nearest town was still 60 miles away, too far to bother walking, and there were monsters there. The police department would have to help us in some way, and if it didn't, then we were really screwed, and we would just wait it out in the store, praying desperately for a rescue of some sort. Or we would just kill ourselves before that happened. That walk was even worse than the one from before, when we had left our ruined car behind. As I said, I had suspected the monster had left us alone that first day because of its injury. There was no reason it wouldn't come back now. Without the safety of our car, we would have no chance against it, not with how fast it moved. I tried not to think about these things as we walked, but it was impossible not to. Even when we saw the building appear in the distance, my heart was still racing. I thought that I had felt stressed during finals week. That was a joke compared to this. Anything I had experienced could not compare to the anxiety that I felt out there. If you've ever feared for your life for any reason, you know what I mean. Fortunately though, nothing happened. We made it into the building in one piece, without having seen a hint of a monster. I was inclined to believe that, just maybe, the monsters were all gone. Until my dad pointed out that there was still no one on the road. People would have returned to our town if it was safe. The police department was not large and it had a waiting room, a few jail cells, 3 offices, and a break room. That was it. So it did not take us long to search the place and determine that no one was around. We were not surprised. We had heard the reports when all this shit started, that there had been missing police officers in the area. They were all dead by then, I was sure of it. The place had been left alone for a long time. Whoever had last left it had left it clean too. There was no food sitting out in the break room, no waste in the trash cans, no papers scattered in desks. All the lights had been turned off too. It was like a museum. I would have almost preferred to see some signs of a chaotic departure, or bloodstains to suggest a fight had occurred. There was nothing. The emptiness did nothing to calm my nerves. My dad remained stoic, probably to comfort me. He must have been scared like I was though, because anyone would have been. But still, he didn't shy away from anything we did. And he always made sure that I was eating enough, even when we had spent time in the store. He was frustrated by our search, to say the least. He knocked over a computer monitor in the waiting area and shattered it, throwing curses at the walls. That wasn't the end of it either. He went on to break the water dispenser, throw a chair at the wall, rip up magazines by the front door. I finally got him to calm down when I said that the monster might hear all the noise. A bullshit thing to say, I know, because wouldn't the monster have heard us before? And while it had looked scary as hell, it hadn't seemed as supernatural or anything. Besides its speed, that was. My dad went out the back entrance towards the parking lot. He figured it was worth checking, since we had walked all that way to get here. And it paid off. There was a police car in the lot and it had its keys in the ignition. Problem was, the seat was covered in blood. I thought I was going to throw up looking at it. Somehow, I kept my food down and I went back. There had been rolls of paper towels in the break room, and I grabbed one of them to bring back out. The seat took a while to clean off. My dad insisted that it was unnecessary, since he would be the one driving and he didn't care. But I did. I didn't want his clothes to get soaked with blood, because anyone we saw across the border would get very suspicious. He relented at that thought. We did clean it though. We realized, of course, that there would be questions at the border regardless. We had the audacity to bring our passports, but the police car clearly had our town name written on it, and we were not police officers. My dad said that we would figure it out when we got there, that it wasn't worth worrying about when there were more pressing matters at hand. He didn't know how true that statement would become. Before we could get in, there was a rustling noise behind us. I froze, but my dad spun immediately, both hands on his pistol. I saw him turn off his safety, but that was as far as he got. The monster was on him a millisecond later. I couldn't see anything beneath the monster's panting flesh. Its head was bent over my dad like a starving dog. I probably waited too long to shoot it, but I did. I caught it in the shoulder, and it howled like it had earlier. I noted absent-mindedly that it was the same monster too. There was a crusted over wound on its side, exactly where I had shot it from the car. It backed off, and my dad stumbled to his feet. He was covered in blood and slobber. I couldn't tell if he was alright, and I didn't have time. The monster came after me next. To say that it was terrifying does not do it justice. Having the thing bowl me over and then stand on top of me, slobbering like a beast, leaning its head close to mine, feeling its hot breath on my face, it was too much. I couldn't move, looking at the thing. I doubt I could have moved regardless, since it had my arms pinned beneath its weight. It was heavier than it looked, and it didn't look like a lightweight. I thought my bones were going to break beneath the thing. It was squeezing the air out of my lungs too, which didn't help. For some reason, it did not go after me like it did my dad. It spent a half a second observing me with a sort of withdrawn intelligence. Its eyes shifted over my face, eager but furtive, looking at the gun still in my hand. I'm not sure if it made the connection between its wound and the gun, but I would have bet that it did. I heard several gunshots. The monster flinched and then fell on its side. Blood was pouring out of its head. I stared at it in shock from my place on the ground. It returned my gaze with a lifeless stare. My dad was okay somehow. He had a few cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. I was worried about infection. My dad said that it was the least of our concerns. We just had to get the hell out of there. As for me, I was just shaken up. I was covered in the monster's slobber, which did make me throw up this time. Or maybe the sight of the monster made me do that, lying in a pool of its own blood. We went into the bathroom to wash up, and there was still running water somehow, and we went back to the car. My dad didn't waste any time. Even though we were tired, he poured the gas and set off down the road. Eventually, we made it to the border without any other encounters. I think we relaxed once we saw cars on the road again. I know I did. My dad, as unreadable as he had been before, at least let up on the gas pedal. The last thing we needed was a speeding ticket. The guys at the border didn't question us, or even mention that we were in a cop car. They just looked at our passports and then let us go. Maybe they had thought that we were officers off duty, or they had seen other police come through before. Whatever the case, I was happy to avoid trouble. We're now living in the Toronto metro area. My dad had a lot of money saved up from his store, and I'm starting up college again, so I should be able to work soon. He also found a part-time job as a senior manager at a local chain. I guess they were impressed by his resume, though it did not make any mention of the monsters. In fact, the monsters haven't even made the news up here. I still don't know how our government kept it a secret. We still can't post about it though. My previous post got deleted when I mentioned our town's name. For some reason though, they didn't delete my account. Maybe because my first post stayed up. As far as I know, the monsters haven't left our state. We called our other friends that live there, and they know nothing about it. My other friend, the one that texted me before we left, hasn't responded. I fear the worst for him. It'll be hard adjusting to life in a new country, a new environment for that matter. We've lived in small towns our whole life. The suburbs aren't that busy, but there are still more people than we're used to. And my college is way bigger than the one that I used to attend. It's also been hard living without Mom. I don't really need to elaborate on that. Most of you reading this have probably lost someone close, and you know how it is. For what it's worth, I think my dad and I have taken it well. Although we're still sad about what had happened, my dad and I are happy now, I think. We'll actually have a chance to live again. After spending over a month in hell, we deserve it.